I too have seen weird shit as a Marine. Convoy. By Rev Black Rage. This was back in 2008 or 2009. I was in Iraq, not with tracks but as a provisional rifleman. Now what that basically means is you stop doing the job you trained for, get run through 6 months of training to do some ground pounder shit, then deploy off to do someone else's job. It can go either way. Sometimes it's fun and you get to do some cool shit. Sometimes you end up in watchtowers staring at the same patch of desert for months at a time, or doing some lame-ass gopher errands. This was during the troop surge, and Iraq was fairly tame at that point. There was still shit going on, bad guys were still moving and doing bad guy things, random garbage on the side of the road was still exploding, but the overall amount of violence was dramatically decreased. You might think that was a good thing, and for the people of Iraq, I concede the point, that it probably was. But for a dude in his 20s who had Marine Corps tattoos, a gun, and a bad attitude, it was almost depressing. You got trained to do a job, you want to do that job. You want to smoke check some bad guys and blow some shit up. But such is the whims of war, I guess. I found myself rolling back to Camp Ramadi, a large-ish former Iraqi army base that had been taken over by the US Marine Corps. My company of Amtrackers had been attached to a grunt battalion, which meant we had to do all the shit that they didn't want to do. We had been doing lodge runs to the satellite compounds that were stationed in the controlling positions around the city of Ramadi, and out in the surrounding region. It had been a long day driving all over Allah's creation, and I was ready to get back and get some sleep. Oh, I should clarify that lodge runs are definitely a bullshit gopher errand. Run ammo and mail out to some middle-of-nowhere patrol base, run hot chow to an entry control point compound, take this here, take that back there. Lets you get out and move around, sure, but it was tedious as all hell. There were 3 trucks in our convoy, an up-armored Humvee rolling behind us, and an MTVR or 7-ton truck behind that. Normally we would have a 4th truck with us with a mine roller on it, and a few more bodies, but we were already spread thin as it was. And somebody above us figured that with the lull in violence, we would have been okay. I'd like to punch that guy square in the dick. I was driving an MRAP or mine-resistant ambush-proof vehicle, a model known as the Buffalo to be exact, a big old 6-wheel 17-ton truck, armored to fucking back, with a V-shape hull design to deflect blasts outward. It feels like driving in an armored womb though, for me at least. It's not super tight on the inside, but it still feels a touch claustrophobic for a bigger dude like myself. The truck is loud. So loud that you have to wear a headset to talk to the guy next to you, if you don't want to yell. Its big-ass engine roaring along in front of you and the low drone of 6 massive tires rolling on asphalt. When you put on the headset, it mutes all the external sound to a dull roar, and resembles the product of a white noise machine. On top of that, I was wearing body armor. I felt nice and snug, like I had just been tucked in after Thanksgiving dinner. After a long day on the road, driving around in a fucking rolling ASMR video, I was getting pretty damn drowsy, which isn't rare. People fall asleep at the wheel all the time in these damn things, and I wasn't the only one feeling it, I know that much. I glanced at the Humvee behind me in my side mirror. I could see the truck was starting to lag a little bit behind, opening up dispersion between the vehicles, which usually meant the driver was nodding off and reflexively letting off the gas.
Gator 2, pick up the pace.
The convoy leader, a staff sergeant we called Twiddles, behind his back at least, who happened to be sitting in the passenger seat next to me, chastised over the radio. No one in the Humvee responded, but the truck picked up speed a little bit.
Fuckers are falling asleep on us.
The convoy leader growled over the truck's internal comms. Can't say I blame him, I replied over the headset. I'm hurting too, Staff Sergeant.
Well, it's a good thing you have the fucking discipline to keep your eyes open then, ain't it?
He said in a voice that prophesized unimaginable torments if I failed to comply with the implied threat. "It is indeed, Staff Sergeant," I said. Having been in the military for a few years at that point, the threat of a smoke session had lost a lot of its threat to me. But Twiddles, he could be a real petty son of a bitch when he wanted to be. "You awake up there, Fitty?" I asked the Marine riding in the turret, drawing some of the fire off of me.
"Are we there yet?"
was all Fitty replied. About 15 minutes later, as Staff Sergeant Twiddle snoozed in the passenger seat, I was doing my level best to fight off the sleep monster. You know when you're driving while tired, you start to see movement out of the corner of your eye? I was starting to get that. Truckers called them black dogs, and that meant it's time to get your ass off the road and get some sleep. I think that's why I initially dismissed him at first, as a figment of my tired brain. A mere mental ghost on the side of the road.
"All Vics halt."
Fitty yelled over the radio.
"I got something on our deck on our right."
Well, that woke me up. I brought the truck to a halt, checking the rear view to make sure that the trucks behind me weren't about to slam into me, before turning my attention back to the road ahead of me and the surrounding areas, looking for anything that might be a threat. When someone calls halt in a convoy, you halt. It may just save your life. Staff Sergeant Twiddles came awake too. I saw him reach up to his headset out of the corner of my eye.
Did you just stop my fucking convoy over one dumbass hitchhiking Iraqi out looking for his next goat to fuck?"
Staff Sergeant Twiddles said groggily over the net.
I think he's an American or a Brit, Staff Sergeant."
Fitty said from his perch in the turret.
"His gear looked like ours, and I think he's alone. I got my NVGs on, and I can't see no one else. He's alone."
Staff Sergeant Twiddles looked perplexed at this. An American, much less a Brit, wouldn't be out here hitchhiking the Iraqi back roads at balls o'clock at night. Especially not alone. Maybe a Georgian. Those dudes are fucking wild. This was something that we would have to check out. Can't leave a brother to get kidnapped or tortured to death on Al Jazeera.
"Gator 1, Gator 3.
The Marine in charge of the 7-ton at the rear of the convoy came over the net.
"Why we stopped? My gunner said he saw a crunchy on the side of the road. Gator 2, you see anything?" "Yeah, I got eyes on him. He's at the back deck about halfway between my truck and yours."
The vehicle commander of the Humvee responded.
"You want me to go check him out? What's he doing?" "He's just standing there."
Gator 2 responded.
"Staring out at the desert." "Alright, all Vics, 5 and 15s.
Staff Sergeant said over the net, which meant he was telling the crews of all 3 trucks to conduct an inspection of the area 5 feet around the vehicles, to make sure whoever was about to get out of their truck didn't step on a conveniently placed IED. After that, you would expand the search of exploding bullshit to 15 feet. If it looked clear, you opened the door and inspected the ground directly below you. If it looked okay, you could get out.
Gator 2, driver and TC dismount and back me up. Gator 3, let the COC know that we found what looks like a lost coalition personnel, and we're going to check him out and bring him in."
Staff Sergeant Twiddles looked at me and nodded. I nodded back and shut the truck down. Normally the driver and the gunner stay with the truck at all times. But we were 8 guys in 3 trucks, and we didn't have any dismounts. So the drivers went to walking. You gotta do what you gotta do with what you got sometimes. I climbed down my side of the truck and then walked around to Staff Sergeant Twiddles, who was busy yelling at 50 up in the turret. "Keep your fucking eyes open," he sagely advised. "Don't let me get tagged by some mooj sniper because you weren't paying attention." Fitty responded with a thumbs up, which transitioned into a middle finger as soon as the Staff Sergeant turned his back. I rolled my eyes and turned to follow our beloved leader. It was a quiet walk. There was a bit of tension in the air. Staff Sergeant Twiddles had his pistol out, and my rifle was at the ready as we approached the man standing on the side of the road. The Marines from Gator 2 were approaching from the opposite direction. They both had their rifles up as well. They both had nerve showing in their posture, and I couldn't say that I blamed them. Shit was quite frankly weird, and it had a lot of potential to go stupid at any moment. We all stopped about 30 feet away from the guy, just in case he might explode or something silly like that. At that point in time, it was mostly peaceful in our AO, but at the end of the day we were still at war, so probably best to be wary of exploding people. The night was quiet as desert nights tend to be, with only the rumbling of Gator 3's diesel engine as it pulled a 3-point turn, so they could watch back the way we came, in the distance floating towards us on a light breeze. I brought up my rifle and switched on the surface flashlight affixed to the rails of my gun. The sudden bright light illuminated our mysterious friend. It was weird. The guy was definitely in American gear, alright, just gear from 20 years ago. The dude had an old school Marine Corps uniform, which featured a camouflage pattern known as chocolate chip. He wore a 1980 style flak jacket which was adorned with an old school load-bearing vest. He also had an old M16A2 service rifle slung over his shoulder. He looked like a Desert Storm reenactor, one of those nerds who drops a couple of grand on era-appropriate gear, just to go out and play soldier for the weekend. Thing was, this man had a defeated air about him. He didn't look like he was about to go pretend assault some fake Republican guardsmen and then go pound a few brewskis with the boys at TGI Fridays afterward. He looked like someone had just shot his puppy. Arms hanging down at his side, shoulders slumped, head hanging down, chin on chest. His shoulders shook slightly, and I realized he was quietly sobbing. Nobody said anything for a moment, just watching the sobbing man who was dressed in old gear and carrying an old gun. I looked over at the two Marines from Gator 2. The driver, a guy who went by the name of Turbo, on account of how fucking slow he was, had a concerned look on his face. His rifle was at the ready, but I was willing to bet he wasn't eager to use it. I caught his eyes and we both shared a shrug. The sobbing man was weird, but he didn't throw off any threatening vibe. Just the opposite, in fact. He had clearly been through some shit. Hell, I almost wanted to hug the morose motherfucker. "Hey," Staff Sergeant Twiddles called out, trying to get the sobbing man's attention. The man didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge him, didn't do anything to indicate that he knew 4 armed men were standing around him. "Hey," Twiddles tried again, "are you an American?" No response from the man. Twiddles took a step toward the man, as if he were about to walk up to him, but then he thought better of it. Instead, he knelt down and picked up a chunk of concrete the size of a Hot Wheels car. He stood back. Before anyone could ask him why he was about to throw a rock at a man who was crying, he threw a rock at a man who was crying. The rock bounced off the man's shoulders. At first it looked like he was going to keep ignoring us, but eventually the sobbing man's head shifted a little in our direction. He paused like that for a moment, as if weighing out what to do next. He finally stood up straight and put a hand on his forehead and turned towards me and Twiddles. His anguished face had a red hue to it, like he had been crying for a while. I noticed that besides his red face, he was paler than shit. He ran his hand across his eyes, trying to wipe away tears. He was truly a pathetic sight to behold. "They fucking left me, man," the man said, gasping out between hitched breaths, with tears rolling down his face. He had a Midwestern accent, sort of. The one that said he was born and raised in one of those flyover states defined by corn and flatness. "They fucking left me." As the words left his lips, I felt a pinprick of ice run up my spine, like someone had ran a corner of an ice cube up my vertebrae stack. The man had a normal face, a normal voice, normal eyes, but there was something off about him. A voice in the back of my mind piped up and said, "Yeah, he ain't supposed to be here." I wasn't sure if that meant that he wasn't supposed to be out here on his own, or on this plane of existence. I was leaning towards the latter, but I didn't know why. Something told me we needed to back off of this dude and let him be. Let him keep crying into the desert. But there's no way in hell we could do that. Leaving an American out here by himself was the same thing as sentencing him to be executed. "Alright, man," Staff Sergeant Twiddles responded in what was his version of a soft tone. "We're gonna get you out of here." The man locked eyes with Twiddles and repeated his catchphrase. They fucking left me. Twiddles looked over me with an expression that landed somewhere between holy shit and what the fuck. This was bad. The implication was that a unit was out there leaving guys behind, and for some reason, they were rolling around in Desert Storm gear. "What's your name, bud?" Twiddles said while taking a few more steps towards the sobbing man. I noticed that he hadn't holstered his pistol. He wasn't aiming it at the man, but it wasn't quite down by his side either. I shadowed along with Twiddles. I had my rifle up and pointed in the man's direction. I told myself it was because I wanted to keep him illuminated with my gun light, but looking back on it, it was partially because this dude was an unknown, and I wasn't fully ready to relax just because this guy was an ugly crier. The man ignored Twiddles, his eyes shifting away from him and looking into mine. I offhandedly noticed that he didn't try to block the light from my surefire. Like, the bright-ass gun light in his eyes wasn't bothering him. I remember wondering if that was one of the side effects of shock. I figured that may have been what was bothering me about him. Besides everything else, I mean. I tried to reassure myself that that was what was bothering me, but I knew it wasn't. As you may or may not know, I've dealt with some pretty weird shit in my military career up until that point, and I got the feeling that this was about to be more weird shit. This was years ago, but I remember those eyes as if I had just looked into them. They were sad, hurt, haunted even. If my buddies had left me to die in the desert, I would be pissing fire and ready to tear somebody's dick off, not having an emotional breakdown in some Indian country. Some people cope differently, I guess. Twiddles moved closer to the man and I followed. The Marines from Gator 2 mirrored us from the opposite side. The sobbing man kept me in his gaze. For some reason, my mind wandered back to the little girl on the ramp, the one I wrote about in the first story. I briefly entertained the notion that this was her father and he was crying because he missed her. I brushed that out of mind as a bit of silliness, not really worthy of thought. Upon reaching the man, he broke his unnerving stare and shifted his gaze back into the desert, looking away from me. I remember feeling a vague sense of relief at the broken eye contact. The man's lips were moving, and I realized that he was whispering his words again. They fucking left me. They fucking left me. They fucking left me. They fucking left me. Over and over and over again. The dude's cheese had clearly slid off his cracker. Twiddles realized this as well, and motioned towards his slung rifle while looking at me, leaving disarming an emotionally unstable person to one of his guys, and not doing it himself? Classic Twiddles move. Now, I know what I saw when I reached out to take the man's rifle. The M16A2 service rifle was in good and serviceable condition. When I grabbed the rifle by the barrel and slid it off his shoulder, it changed. As soon as it broke contact with the man's body, it was like somebody had switched the rifle in my hand out for something that had been dug up out of the desert. I don't know how to explain it. 1 minute the thing was a fine example of American-made Colt long gun, and the next, it was a completely different pony. The handguards were brittle and sun-bleached. The metal had been stripped of bluing and was now rusted and pitted, and the carrying handle was mostly rusted away. The buttstock had a big crack in it, the shape of a lightning bolt. I attempted to clear it, but the magazine release button wouldn't budge, and neither would the charging handle. The thing looked like it had been sitting outside for the last 20 years. At least it was unsafe. That would have to do. But shit, I felt like I needed a fucking tetanus shot just from holding the damn thing. Staff Sergeant Twiddles looked over at the Marines representing Gator 2. "I'm gonna put him in your truck, Leprechaun," Twiddles told the Marine in charge of Gator 2. His nickname was Leprechaun because he was an absolutely massive walking slab of muscle, merely masquerading as a human being. If he starts getting out of line, you pop him one and settle him down. We'd put him in the back of the Buffalo, but it's full of gear right now. Leprechaun didn't say anything back to Twiddles, just gave him a blank look before slowly nodding at him in the affirmative. The way Twiddles issued the decree about the sobbing man riding in the Hummer was telling. They were both valid reasons. Leprechaun would in fact be able to handle this man if he lost his shit. And the buffalo did in fact have equipment in it. But the way the words fell out of the staff sergeant's mouth, at a slightly quicker pace than usual, painted a clear picture of the nervous energy Twiddles was infected with. The man could have ridden in our trunk, but I don't think Twiddles would have let that happen. I mean, shit. Not that I would have been eager to have him sitting behind me in the truck either. But he was obviously passing the buck on this one. Twiddles tried to break through to the sobbing man one more time. "Hey buddy," he said. "You're gonna be okay. We're gonna get you back to Camp Ramadi." The sobbing man looked back at Twiddles. He didn't even say his catchphrase this time. He just gave his head a frustrated shake. Twiddles looked up at Leprechaun and told him to get the sobbing man loaded up. Leprechaun put his hand on the man's shoulders and urged him back to the Hummer. The sobbing man took one last look out at the desert. Finally, he dropped his head and turned to go with Leprechaun and Turbo. The man kept whispering his motto. "They fucking left me." I lit up a smoke as we walked back to our truck, trying to let the nicotine calm me down some, sneaking glances at the man over my shoulder. Twiddles was eager to get back on the road to Camp Ramadi. I think he was mostly eager to get the sobbing man off his hands. Not to mention that it's never really a good idea to spend too much time stopped in one place, while outside the wire. For all we knew, Terry Taliban was dialing in our position with his trusty mortar, and trying to get his best friend Alan Al-Qaeda to sneak up on our position with his trusty RPG. Fuck both of them, I remember thinking. I looked down at the battered rifle in my hand. This thing was a fucking relic, and it looked every bit the age of one. It was still fucking with me. The fact that it looked almost brand new on the man's shoulder, but now it looked like the gun Fred Flintstone would have learned to shoot with. I told myself that it was just my mind fucking with me. But I knew I was lying to myself. Because why would this guy have been so far outside the wire with a rifle in such shit shape? Hell, most of the locals would have turned their nose up at it. We mounted back up in the truck, and I put the rifle in the console next to me. Twiddles didn't say much. He just waited for me to get settled in my seat before he keyed out the radio.
All Vix,
he said into the headset.
Roger up when you're ready to move.
Gators 2 and 3 notified us that they were ready to move. Staff Sergeant Twiddles told everyone that we were stepping off, and notified our COC that we were getting back on the move with a +1, and we got back on the road to Camp Ramadi. We hadn't gone more than a mile or so before Leprechaun came over the net.
Gator 1, Gator 2?
Leprechaun's booming voice came over our headsets, startling the absolute shit out of me. I was lost in a moment of deep thought. The sort you tend to fall into on a long drive.
Gator 2, go for Gator 1,
Twiddles responded.
This dude's starting to freak out,
Leprechaun said over the net. I could hear the sobs of the man in the background.
He's got his hands on his head and he's damn near screaming about getting left behind. Over.
I looked up at the armored Humvee in my side mirror. I noticed that it was closing up the dispersion between our vehicles, a little bit closer than I would have liked. Turbo may have been trying to make up for his general lack of speed, or he was eager to get the movement over with. I don't know which.
Roger that. If he gets too bad, we'll pull over and hog tie him, but I'd rather not have to do that. Roger that, Gator 1.
Leprechaun rumbled back over the radio.
We'll try and...
Leprechaun was cut off right as the world behind me erupted in noise and violence. There was a bright flash in my rear view, and it felt like a giant kicked my truck square in the ass. I must have reflexively cranked the wheel or something because, next thing I know, the ass end of the truck is whipping around and I swear I'm up on 3 wheels. Without thinking, I cranked the wheel out of the spin and managed to put us down on all 6. The truck jolted violently as it touched down. I heard something crunch, and I felt more than I heard the engine quit doing its job. The truck lurched to a stop sideways across the road. My whole body screamed in protest at the spin cycle it had just been put through. Everything was fuzzy and my head was banging. I felt like I was going to vomit. Not sure how I managed to keep this big bitch with its high center of gravity from flipping over. I realized I still had my boot jammed on the brake.
Gator Main, Gator Mobile.
I heard a voice say from far off in the weeds.
We just got hit. We just got hit bad.
I realized that it was Twiddle speaking into his headset, letting the COC know that we were in a bad way. His voice was oddly calm. I looked beyond him out of his window. All I saw was smoke in the darkness, lit up by the panels from my truck. Fiddy was no longer up in his turret. I knew that because his head poked out from behind us, blocking my view of the shit show outside the window. He looked over at me. I could tell he was having trouble focusing on me. You okay, bro? He managed to ask me. His words were slurred, and he was talking a lot louder than he needed to. Blood was just pouring out of his nose. I would find out later that his eardrums were ruptured and he had a monster of a concussion. Since he had been on the turret, he caught some of the shockwave of the blast, and then had been slammed around by the truck's attempt to be a motorcycle. He was missing teeth and blood was spilling out of his mouth. I think that his face had been introduced to the buttstock of the machine gun. Not quite sure how he didn't go flying out of the turret. I'll give him credit though. After taking a beating like that, his first thought was to check on us. The next few hours were a blur, trying to make sure Fiddy wasn't going to die, moving up to the crater in the road that used to be Gator 2, looking for my friends that were just short of vaporized, looking at the shattered remains of the up-armored gun truck and knowing that none of my friends would have survived that, finding unidentifiable pieces of human body, trying to set up some kind of security cordon while being drastically undermanned. The sun was coming up, the QRF arriving, a corpsman telling me to sit down at some point. It was all sort of a blurred daze. My truck was trashed, but not to the extent to Gator 2. But it wasn't rolling out of there on its own power. The IED that we managed to hit had been designed for an MRAP or an Abrams. It was at least 3 155 shells wired to a pressure plate. We must have just missed it, but Gator 2 sure as shit found it. The blast had been just massive. It would have blown the turret out of an Abrams. The Humvee, it never stood a chance. At some point, I got put in the back of one of the QRF trucks. A Humvee, actually. If I hadn't been so tired and punch drunk, I might have objected to it. But, as it were, I was just ready to be out of there. Fiddy was long gone at this point. They had called in a CASVAC bird for him and the Marine who was riding in the gun on Gator 3. A kid we ended up calling Scarface, on account of the wicked scar he got when a piece of Gator 2 went across his left cheek. They flew them to a shock trauma unit in Baghdad. Fiddy survived. There was still a lot of activity on the road as we were getting ready to leave. An M88 Hercules was extending its crane, so it could load the remaining pieces of the Humvee onto a lowboy trailer. Marines were all over the deck, providing security, picking up pieces of Humvee. I saw 2 Marines looking at certain things amongst the wreckage. They were wearing surgical gloves. They would stop, take a photograph of something, make a note in a logbook, bend down, pick up the thing they had found, and place it in this big black trash bag, and then resume their search. They were picking up pieces of my friends. I looked beyond them. Standing on the side of the road were 4 Marines. They didn't do anything, and nobody seemed to notice them. They were just watching with blank faces as the 2 Marine from Graves Registration did their job. One of them stood out from the others, though. He wore different gear than the others did. Older gear. I felt the driver put the Humvee into gear and start to pull out. I took one last look at the 4 Marines standing on the side of the road. We're leaving them behind, I very clearly remember thinking. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this little series. Definitely go follow Rev Black Rage on Twitter, at Rev Black Rage. You got a pretty good Twitter. I would like to thank my $10 and above patrons, in order, of course, naturally. Dan R., Paul Z., Mr. Swiston, Official Jerboa, Chaos X, JY, Pyromancer, Hayden MH, and Ethan A. Guys, thank you very much. You keep the channel alive. I know I say it in every video, but I do need you to know that it is because of you that this channel can keep going. I hope you enjoyed the Patreon-only content this month. I'm going to try to get another video done because I got that one kind of early, so maybe you'll get 2 this month if I can. I'm trying to get a video done every day, so we'll see. And thank you to the $5 patrons listed in the description. Make sure you go show Rev Black Rage some love. He has been messaging me through this entire thing, correcting me when I mispronounce something. He's a very good dude. So make sure you go follow him on Twitter and show him some love over on Reddit. He really deserves it. Oh, and before I forget, make sure you go look up some of the stuff he's talking about. Like I said in the last video, I looked it up, the AAVs driving off the back of the ship. It's real cool shit, guys.